JD, we're in a very sad state right now, the state of Georgia. Other than the Alabama fans who've come to visit, everyone here very, very sad. Georgia entered the day #1 in the college football playoff ranking, came to this building, still has not beaten Nick Saban in this building. Still cannot beat Nick Saban for whatever reason.
Tough task.
2nd and 26 happened right down there.
Yep.
That happened. The horrible fake punt with Justin Fields, where all the Alabama players were pointing at Justin Fields, that happened right down there.
Yep.
And Jalen Milroe running all over the field happened right over there. Like, Georgia is down bad. Yep. So here's the question. Is there any chance that Georgia is in the playoff because the committee goes, well, we think they're one of the 4 best teams?
Yeah, I think there's definitely a chance. And I know Michigan and Florida State and Louisville and Iowa will all have their say on that. So maybe we have a better gauge for that at some point. You're watching this on a Sunday morning. But I think if you were just, like we talk about this in other videos, if you're talking about just purely 4 best teams, and you watched what happened out there on that field against Alabama, who is a very different team than we saw week 2 against Texas. Very, very different team. They progressed a ton. I have a very difficult time watching that game and saying, you know what? One of those teams isn't one of the top 4. Like, whether it's Georgia or Bama, I think both of them deserve to be in the top 4. Now should they be in the top 4 based on the way it works out? Well, right, probably another conversation.
Let's do the Vegas thing.
Yep.
How many teams would Vegas have Georgia favored over tomorrow, of the ones we're comparing? I don't know that Georgia would be favored over Alabama after what we saw today.
Yeah, that's fair. I think it'd be close. I think it'd be very close.
They still might be favored.
Yes.
But would they be favored over Michigan?
Probably within a field goal. Probably within a field goal. Yeah.
Would they be favored over Washington? Yep. Most certainly. Would they be favored over Florida State?
Yep.
Would they be favored over Texas?
Yes.
Now,
maybe closer than that one.
Kirby Smart would tell you that you just got your answer.
Yeah.
As far as your second question, look, Bill Hancock said it's not the most deserving. He said simply, it's the best 4 teams. So if you're going to tell me somebody sitting in that committee room and doesn't think that Georgia team not one of the best 4 teams, I don't know if they're in the right profession, because it's a really good football team. It's a really talented football team. It's a really balanced football team. So they have to make that decision. But it's the best 4 teams, and that's critical.
That's fair. I think 4 best versus who should be favored on neutral field is a difficult conversation, because at some point too, the games do have to matter.
Right, and they've never used Vegas spreads. They've never used that.
Nor should they, because at that point, before the season, we're throwing in Ohio State, we're throwing in Michigan, we're throwing in all those
I didn't
teams.
even mention Ohio State would be favored over most of those teams.
Easy.
Yeah.
Easy.
Maybe not most, half of them.
A fair amount, enough to be within that top 4 conference in striking distance at least. And so I do think it's a slippery slope to say, okay, well, the game's mattering versus who'd be favored. Again, I don't envy anybody in that room who has to be on the committee. I don't envy anybody in that room. But if you're going to talk about 4 best, I do think you could put Georgia in that conversation. Now, I would be surprised if Georgia's in. Just full transparency. What we know right now, I'd be surprised if Georgia found their way in.
It's hard, because I think the Texas win against Alabama is what knocks them out.
Yep.
If let's say Texas had scheduled a different SEC school, if they'd scheduled Ole Miss or they'd scheduled Missouri, and they'd beaten them in week 2, and they went on to have a really good year, like they still went on to be 10-2 like they are this year, they would just leave Texas out and they put Georgia and Alabama in.
Yep.
But because you have to account for that head-to-head win for Texas over Alabama, like, I think you have to have Texas above Alabama.
Yeah, there's no way.
ranking.
And that was a little bit in question in my mind the last couple of weeks of the season, because Texas is just kind of eking out wins.
Right.
And the way they finished the year,
Texas
50-point win over Texas Tech,
Whew.
definitive win over Oklahoma State, kind of a left no doubt style points on the table. Like, hey, feel good about what you did if you're Steve Sarkisian. Point proven, mic drop, all that. So I think going back to that head-to-head, that has to lean towards Texas.
Yeah. And so we've got to see what happens with Georgia. But this was a very un-Georgia game.
Very un-Georgia game.
You had mistakes that Georgia's opponents typically make that Georgia typically takes advantage of. And then I'll go back to a false start before a field goal attempt that makes it 5 yards longer. I believe it turned a 47 into a 52, and it stoinks off the right upright. If it's a 47, it's in.
Yeah.
You've got to kind of get a little cute backed up against your own goal line. Fumble. They're actually lucky the defense held Alabama to a field goal there.
That could have made it interesting.
But
much more ugly.
We just mentioned two field goals. That's a 6-point swing. The margin of victory is 3.
Yeah.
JD, if those don't happen, those mistakes don't happen, Georgia wins the game.
And if I'm a Georgia fan, I think I feel a little bit disappointed, obviously in the loss, but just in the way that they looked. Like, it felt like Alabama doubled down on who they were. Yep. Hey, we're physical. We're going to give Jalen Milroe the ball. We're going to play great defense. And then Georgia kind of, like you said, kind of got a little bit more away from what we've seen them to be all year long. It was weird.
Like itself early.
Yeah.
Like
first
came
drive.
out attacking, throwing the ball down the field, showing you how many different weapons they had in the passing game. And it looked like, oh my God, this is going to be a blowout.
There was a point, yeah.
But then the offense bogged down, and Alabama's defense deserves some credit for that as well. But it felt like Georgia, for half of the first quarter, the second quarter, and a lot of the third, just kind of forgot who they were.
It really did.
And then you
feel
saw
that
them
way.
get back to it. They're playing with a sense of urgency, and all of a sudden it's game again.
Yeah, exactly. Like, there was a point back to what you said about that first half. I think it was like early second quarter. I looked at you in the press box. I was like, Andy, are we going to see a blowout right now? Because Georgia looks awesome. They're throttling down defensively against Jalen Milroe. And I mean, I was surprised going back to Georgia looking un-Georgia-like. I came into this game thinking, okay, what Alabama is going to hurt you with. Design quarterback run, ad-lib stuff. If I'm Kirby Smart, Will Muschamp, Glenn Schumann, we know like they're one of the best preparation operations in the country. And so to see that be the thing that continued to, I mean, that was the game-winning play, essentially, that put the thing on ice with Jalen Milroe.
Exactly. And I mean, during the game, you saw this a few times in the game, these quarterback sweeps to the wide side of the field, where it wasn't a case of Georgia not playing it correctly. They just got blocked on the outside. Like Alabama's receivers and linemen blocked it well, and Milroe gained what he needed to gain.
And it wasn't tricky. It wasn't like, wow, it's the first time we've seen this. How do we account for this? Like, they had trouble with that with Brady Cook, struggle with that with Peyton Thorne, different kind of run plays, but still going back to like the overall thought of a mobile quarterback hurting you. I was surprised to see that be the thing that Georgia got gashed on.
So Kirby Smart thinks they're among the best four. Carson Beck says, you know what? It's our fault. We left it in somebody else's hands.
Super proud of these guys, and obviously to come into this game and not, finish the way that we wanted to, and kind of leave the destiny of our team in someone else's hands rather than us handling it ourselves. That's hard, but at this point it's out of our control. But we fought hard, and I thought throughout the season, we showed that we were a really dominant team.